ring-a-ding-dong dandy. And away we go with another edition of the Stampede Wrestling Show.
Greetings and welcome to the Dave Dynasty Show. I am your host, Dave Dynasty. Thank you for joining us for the second episode of the Ring-a-Ding-Dong Dandy Stampede Wrestling Podcast. This is the podcast where we dive into the history of Stampede Wrestling. That is myself and Moose Jaw Mauler, who will be joining later on to interview our guests today, Kenny Johnson and General CJ, both veterans of the Stampede, the Calgary wrestling area. Kenny wrestled for Stampede in the later years there from 86 to the end of 89. And he's going to talk. He's got a lot of great stories that he will be sharing along with General CJ, his buddy, who also has a lot of great stories. Real quick, let's tell you how you can support the show. You can follow the Ring-a-Ding-Dong Dandy podcast on Twitter at Stampede Pod. We also have a Facebook group where we share Stampede memories, pictures, videos, etc. You can share there too. And you can find that by going to tinyurl.com/Stampede Group. We also now have an official Ring-a-Ding-Dong Dandy shirt. You can find that on our Pro Wrestling Tees shirt. If you want a direct link there, you can go to tinyurl.com/Stampede shirt. It's a very cool shirt. Go buy one. Go buy one for your favorite Stampede fan for Christmas. They will love it. But yeah, we got a great show here with Kenny Johnson and General CJ today. Moose Jaw Mauler interviews them, and then he will talk a little bit about the dungeon, which is the notorious basement of Stu Hart, where guys were trained and stretched, and so on and so forth. You've all heard the tales of Stu Hart's dungeon and guys screaming in agony and being tortured. You may have heard some of the recordings that Owen did when he was young of guys screaming for mercy. So we're going to talk just a touch about that as we dive into this second episode of the Ring-a-Ding-Dong Dandy Stampede Wrestling Podcast. So thanks for joining us. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we will have Moose Jaw Mauler with that interview with Kenny Johnson and General CJ, so stick around.
2020 has been the year of things happening that are completely out of our control. But there is one thing you can control, and that is shaving your bush. That's right. Our sponsors at Manscaped are here to remind you to do so. Now, we've all experienced the quarantine, and when you don't go out in public a lot or you don't go to work as much, you tend to forget the personal grooming habits that you're used to. Well, the Manscaped Lawnmower 3.0 is a premium electric trimmer that's designed to give you a confidence boost through body image. It's very important to groom even during this time. Their ceramic blade and skin-safe technology are designed to reduce nicks or tugs on you fellas down low. The Lawnmower 3.0 is also waterproof and comes with an LED light, so you can manscape in the shower, in the dark, or in a dark shower, whatever floats your boat. They also just released their Shears 2.0 nail kit, which is the perfect add-on to their Lawnmower 3.0 trimmer. The Shears 2.0 is a luxury 4-piece nail kit featuring tempered stainless steel tools, and it includes tipped tweezers, rounded point scissors, fingernail clippers, and a medium grit nail file. The Shears 2.0 nail kit allows you to pluck your eyebrows and trim your nails in style. On the website, you'll also find the Crop Preserver, an anti-chafing ball deodorant and moisturizer. This will help you tame that summer swamp ass with natural hydrators and antioxidants. You'll also find the Crop Reviver, a testy toner that's like having cologne that is designed for your balls. We won't judge you if we catch you sniffing yourself. Go to manscaped.com and check out some of these life-changing products. In fact, listeners of the Dave Dynasty Show will get 20% off plus free shipping with the code DYNASTY20 at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com and use code DYNASTY20. It's time to grab 2020 by the horns by shaving that front trunk.
Hello, Stampede Wrestling fans. Today we've got a special treat for you. We're going to be joined by Kenny Johnson. He's a wrestler that came up through Stampede Wrestling and Hart Brothers Wrestling Camp during 1986. Kenny was in the ring with many Stampede greats such as Chris Benoit, Larry Cameron, Goldie Rogers, Cuban Assassin, and many others. After Stampede Wrestling, he spent some time in some of the Alberta and British Columbia promotions. He's made one trip to Japan for Top Rope Wrestling, and in the late 90s came back and worked with Bruce Hart's reboot of Stampede Wrestling. Currently, Kenny lives in Alberta and wrestles for RCW, that's Real Canadian Wrestling, that has matches every Friday night in Calgary at the Royal Canadian Legion. Joining Kenny today will be his best friend, General CJ. General CJ has a history as a wrestling superfan, but he also got involved in the sport as a referee in the later years and also as a manager at different times. General CJ also was a wrestler for some occasions through the British Columbia promotions during the 1990s and early 2000s. We're going to hear some great stories today about the Victoria Pavilion, some of the Stampede wrestling events between 1986 and 1989, and get a little bit of history about Kenny Johnson's career since Stampede Wrestling wrapped up its first big run in 1989. And let's get going for a Ring-a-Ding-Dong Dandy. Wrestling fans, we're very happy to be here today with Kenny Johnson, renowned wrestler from Stampede Wrestling, along with General CJ. How are you guys doing today, Kenny?
I'm doing good. It's Sunday, and it's warm. It's not cold out at all.
Excellent. How about you, CJ?
Oh, I'm doing good, sir.
Great to hear. Both of you guys had a big role in Stampede Wrestling, and I know you got lots of stories to tell. Both of you were around important today. It's the anniversary of Chris Benoit's debut. Can you tell us about Chris's debut when you were at Victoria Pavilion? How about you, Kenny?
I remember he came in. I remember vaguely, but because I came in quite a bit after him, I would say, and so I just seen him come in, watched him the first night there, what have you, and then he slowly built himself up, and they pushed him, the Hearts pushed him and brought him up along, and then I came in somewhat after him. And I mean, as you see, there was a match there with me and him against the British Bruisers at one time. That was basically for him to get over for his fight with Dynamite later on.
Absolutely. And General CJ, you were in the audience that day along with Kenny for Chris's debut. What do you remember about it?
Oh, I remember sitting in the front row there with watching the match there, and Kenny mentioning that we had seen this young kid in the back where we had parked our vehicles. He got out of the vehicle and I forget who he was with, but he walked into the pavilion, and then all of a sudden we see him come out to the ring with Rick Patterson. And I knew Rick from All-Star Wrestling, and even today I had been on the road with Rick a few times, and he's a great guy. But yeah, the Chris Benoit debut match was one of my memorable things to see, and back in the Stampede days.
Absolutely. Kenny, that was only about a year before you started your first debut in Stampede Wrestling. Is that right?
I would say probably, yeah, if I remember correctly.
Absolutely. Can you tell us about some of your training with the Hart brothers?
Oh, training with the Hearts was, it was good. Let's start off with saying it was good. It was hard. Don't get me wrong. They weren't going to. They didn't want to expose the business back at the time. Nobody wanted to expose the business, so they pushed you hard to see if he would keep coming back. Once he kept coming back, and they kind of realized you were going to stay and what have you, then they started to work with you more, lighten up a little bit on you, what have you, and go from there. And it was just like, okay, he's going to be one of the boys. We're going to bring him into the business and what have you. But back in the day, they didn't want to expose the business to anybody, not just saying the Hearts, but everybody. And they didn't want to just let anybody walk in the door and get into the business.
Absolutely. Still a time of kayfabe. Do you have any good Stu Hart dungeon stories for us?
I don't know if I was fortunate or unfortunate not having to go into the dungeon with Stu. I was down there. Stu was there. He seemed to stretch a couple other guys, and he never really put any holds on me or stretched me or what have you. I was So I don't know if I was fortunate or unfortunate, but I would say I was fortunate. He never tied me up in any holds and made me scream or yell. But I was there with a couple of guys, and it was quite the sight to be seen.
Who'd you get a chance to see tortured down there?
I don't remember the names. A couple of young guys, and like I said, they never came back. I can't remember his name. Excuse me. One of them was Leduc's kid, Jose Leduc's kid. And when he was down there, he came in from Quebec, and they were training him, and Stu had him. I think somebody has it out there. I think TJ might have it out there on a tape somewhere. He's screaming in the basement like crazy, like a baby.
I've seen a few of those, yeah. You came into the business around the same time as Beef Wellington and Jeff Wheeler. Do you have any good stories about training with them?
I trained with both of them. All three of us ended up in the class. I was training prior. I'd come down on Thursday nights and Fridays with Bruce and Kazmaier and DeSalvo, and Bruce would kind of use me as like a guinea pig for Steve and for Bill to do some stuff. And I was willing, of course, because I wanted to learn. And that's why I think I had a bit of an easier way in. Like Bruce knew I could handle it and I could take it. But then when they started that Heart program, that Heart Wrestling Camp, myself was one of the first ones along with Jeff and Beef when we were there. There was I think there's about 6 or 8 of us, but Beef and I and Jeff were basically the 3 that came out of that and kind of pursued our careers and what have you. Yeah, Biff was a great guy. I tagged with Jeff there a couple times. We did some single matches a couple of times, and they were great. 2 of them were great guys.
Now, you would have come into Stampede kind of late 1986 and early 1987. How was Bruce Hart as a booker back then?
You say what you want about the Hart, say what you want about Bruce, say what you want about Ross, what have you. We can talk bad about him, we can talk good about him, but like Bruce was very smart. Like a lot of my stuff wasn't booked by him. All my finishes came from Ross. Ross was the one who kind of guided me. And you're working this night against this fella. You're working here. You're working there. Here's your finish type of thing. And you just do a couple spots here and there. So Ross basically guided me through there. Bruce come in once in a while, and he'd give you a different finish and what have you, and you weren't sure whose finish you're going to do, Ross or Bruce. But Bruce was good. I never really had any problems with him. But I know one time I was in Japan with Bad News, and Bad News said to me, he said, Bruce was very, very, very smart and way ahead of his time.
Yeah, he was innovative in many ways. He came up with a lot of great ideas over the years, for sure. Now, you would have been traveling the roads in Stampede. You would have been doing some of those 3,000-mile road trips around the circuit. Tell us about how that was in the winter. How was that in the wintertime for you?
It was crazy. I was lucky in a lot of ways, too. There was I guess you can say it was kind of like a clique. There was Ben Bastrab, there was Ron Ritchie, and I kind of fit in with those guys. They all they wanted to do was wrestle and party and hit the towns and all that. So I kind of fit in with them, and I was lucky because if you didn't fit in with those 2 guys, if they could rib you and drive you crazy, drive you nuts, they would do that to everybody. And I was kind of fortunate. They kind of let me ride with them, let me fit in with them. We'd be in the vans, and we'd be any of the young guys would be in there. They would rib them so bad, and they'd pick on them all for hundreds and hundreds of miles. But I remember coming out of North Battleford, Saskatchewan one night, and it was a Thursday, and we left there, and it was snowstorm all the way back to Calgary. And it was, like I said, it was a Thursday night. We had to be back for Calgary Friday morning for TV taping on Friday night. Wayne Hart drove the whole distance. Snowstorm, what have you. It was absolutely crazy.
Were you around at all for when the Stu Hart statue in Drumheller rib was pulled with the big dinosaur statue?
I wasn't there when it was pulled, but I did hear about it, and I'm trying to remember who it was pulled on. From my recollection, it was Tommy Nash, who worked as David Heath as Gangrel in the WWE.
I think it had to do with Bill Kazmaier at one point, didn't it?
It may have had to do with Kazmaier as well, and and I had heard about it, but I was not there. Although there was lots of times I traveled in the van, and Kazmaier sitting in the front, and Ben, like I said, Ben and Richie would get on him constantly.
Now, I heard you have a reputation as a ribber, too. Give us a couple of your stories from what you pulled on people.
Oh, man, we did the usual stuff. cutting guys' laces on their boots and what have you, and they're trying to tie their boots up, and of course they got to go on in about 20 minutes, half an hour. They got no laces. I remember one, and CJ, I don't know if you remember this. There was a little fella. His name was Jamie Stringer, who worked around the territory, and there was a lot of times I'd call him up, and we'd train together, and he'd help me out a lot. But we were on a show somewhere in Alberta. I think we were working for Les Thornton at the time, and he was like the little mid-heavyweight champion. And he went out to get a coffee in the concession, and we took his belt, we put it up top on a cabinet, and he couldn't find his belt for the life of him. And his music's playing, and he's got to go out. He has to wear his belt out there. And finally, we dug it up. He was going absolutely crazy. Like, he wanted that belt so bad. And we're like, as soon as he left the dressing room, the boys like, you can tell he's a mark for the belt.
General CJ, do you remember that story about Jamie Stringer?
No, not offhand. Sorry.
The belt on top of the shelf when he was supposed to go out for Les Thornton's promotion?
No, actually I don't. I do remember a little bit of Les stuff, though.
Sure, tell us about that.
Oh, I remember when Les came to Innisfil here at the old Innisfil Arena, and Kenny was on the show. He came out, he had a tag team partner by a guy by the name of Robbie Ray. They came out and did their match. That was pretty exciting to see them come out and do their match. And there was a few good guys on that card, and I really enjoyed that show. It was an old school type of wrestling show, which Les, Les was pretty old school, man. Like, he was like the man of 1,000 holds, like when he was in WWF and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I really enjoyed that show when they came to Innisfil.
I was always surprised that Les Thornton stuck around Alberta after things kind of got laid off with Stampede Wrestling. Why did he stay around Alberta at that time?
I'm not too sure. Well, he had a wrestling school in Calgary there for a while, and I remember an old picture that I seen in the Calgary Sun of he had a picture when Dynamite Kid showed up to one of the training sessions, and all these bulldogs that Dynamite had supposedly, and yeah, that was a pretty good memory of Les back then.
I think Les Thornton was taking on some of the guys that trained with the Hart Brothers but couldn't get on with Stampede Wrestling. Is there some truth to that?
Well, I remember reading in Heath McCoy's book, a wrestler by the name of Skull Mason. He trained, I guess, with the Harts, and then the Harts wouldn't book him, so he went to Les, and yeah, he was on I believe he was on the show with when Les brought his show to Innisfil, and I remember Dr. Zhivago being on there, and I believe he was the main event. He went against a guy that Les brought in as a Japanese wrestler that he brought in as he gimmicked as Tiger Mask. I remember working as the security guy at ringside, taking all the boys' stuff back to the dressing room back then. That's what I remember.
Now, General CJ, do you remember being around when Kenny Johnson debuted? Can you tell us any stories about his first matches with Stampede?
I wasn't around so much around when Kenny debuted. I do remember him debuting, though. And yeah, I really enjoyed him, and especially when he hit the TV waves. That was even more exciting to see. But a very good friend of mine that we spent a lot of time going to the pavilion and watching these guys in the ring and dreaming that one day we're going to be in the ring, and then Kenny being in the ring. And that was a very exciting time back then.
So, Kenny, I think your first match, and correct me if I'm wrong, in Calgary was with Mr. Hito's. You were teaming a tag team. Now, Mr. Hito had been around for a long time. He was a great veteran by that time. What was that like teaming up with Mr. Hito when you were a raw rookie at the moment?
Excuse me. It was good to team up with him. They would use him at that time a lot with the younger guys to kind of sort of bring him in, but it was nervous as hell. it was my first match. He was my tag partner, and it was Friday night, and it was TV. I never expected to be TV the very first match on one of the biggest promotions in the world. But yeah, I was nervous, and it was good. He treated me well. He helped me through everything and what have you. And yeah, it was very enjoyable.
Now, I think you were wrestling at the end of '89 when Stampede was getting ready to start shutting down. Can you tell us about what was happening around that time? What was happening with Bruce and with Stu?
For myself, we really didn't know. We were kind of sort of, I'd say we were definitely kept out of the loop. We really didn't know what was happening business-wise. And still 3 years in, I worked for I started with Stampede. I worked a bit with Les Norton there, and I had gone and done a trip with Tony Condello and what have you, but still not knowing. I'd say still wet behind the ears, still learning the business. Back then, it took a while to really learn, to really feel yourself out and where you wanted to be, where you needed to be. And if guys weren't willing to help you, you never knew. And it took a while to really learn and find out. So we never really knew nothing that was going on, and it's just that you kind of see the light through. I guess I seen the light through the money, through the paychecks coming, and then the checks starting to go. Well, they weren't going through; they were bouncing and what have you. But let's call a spade, to be honest. There, and then you start to learn. It's like, okay, it's time to go somewhere else or get out, right?
What was leading to that? Were the crowds starting to dwindle in '89? Was that a lot of the WWF pressure on Western Canada?
I don't know. The crowds were dwindling. I mean, and you know what? I don't know what Bruce was doing. I don't know what Ross was doing in behind the scenes. I don't know what was going on with Stu. Its business was slow, and they didn't. The names were gone. Brett was gone. Jimmy was gone. Mind you, I wasn't there when Brett and Jimmy were there. Davey Boy Dynamite were gone. They had their big deals, but they were coming in off and on once in a while. Owen was on his way, what have you, and like David Schultz was gone. Kerry and Duke, again, names that were just leaving and going and getting signed, and it was just going downhill.
At that time in the history of Stampede Wrestling in 1989, there were a lot of veterans there, a lot of young guys. For the young guys, what were they looking at? Were they looking at other promotions in Alberta? Were they looking at leaving and going elsewhere at that time?
Young guys didn't really know where to look. Excuse me. They didn't really know where to look because, like, if you go back a bit, one thing about Stampede Wrestling and their guys like Duke Myers, Kerry Brown, Dave Schultz, Leo Burke, all those guys, and you can name a ton of other guys too. They work their asses off night out and night in and night out, and they work their asses off. And as younger guys come in, and myself, like, when I traveled with Kerry prior to getting into the business, I go up and down to Edmonton with him, and he told you, and you learn to respect those guys. You learn to respect your elders, right? It goes back to that, and you respect the business. You respect the guys. You take all the help you can get. Eyes and ears open, mouth closed, right? But the younger guys come in and they just thought they're going to make millions of dollars. They're going to be on Stampede Wrestling. They're going to be on TV. So they didn't really weren't really able to get in with the vets. And so I think I was fortunate by slowly talking to Kerry, talking to Duke, talking to a few of the older guys and what have you, and taking advice and going that way and what have you. And you learn from it. But the younger guys just weren't, I don't know if they're willing to learn, wanted to learn, or what. And it's just like they just thought they were going to go and be these big stars on Stampede Wrestling. And it's not like that. It's a lot of work in progress.
Absolutely. Paying your dues. You know, the very first time I ever saw you was in Regina. You faced off against Ted Arcidi, who I wouldn't describe as a veteran, but you faced a lot of other veterans. You're up against Cuban Assassin, Duke Myers. Was there one veteran in Stampede Wrestling who you saw as a mentor to some of the younger guys?
Duke and Kerry. Duke and Kerry. Kerry was really good. He would always, and I don't know if it was just myself being fortunate to kind of sort of know him. But Duke and Kerry Brown, like I said, always had advice for me, always were willing. If I wanted to talk to them and ask them, pick their brains, they were willing to talk to me. Even guys like Ben Basser have helped me out, Ron Ritchie helped me out. I remember one time I had a match. I can't remember who it was with, and came back to the dressing room. But the following Friday, we were in there. Dynamite came in the dressing room, and he says to me, "Ken, have you got a roll of tape?" And I'm like, "Yeah, here, Tommy." And I handed him a roll of tape. And he says, "Hey, that was a nice match last week, by the way. That was a good match." And he walked away, and I was like, "Oh, wow." Like, to get a compliment from Dynamite Kid, somebody that we've watched for years come through the business in Calgary and grow and what have you. And I was like, I thought that was pretty down to earth. I thought that was pretty freaking decent. About 10 minutes later, I go back to the other dressing room to get my tape, and he's like, "Oh, sorry, buddy, I used it. I'll get you another roll next week." I'm like, "Great rib, right?"
Right.
So I'm like, "What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do to Dynamite, right?" First, he takes your tape, he tells you had a great match. What more could you ask for? So I just walked away. Said, "Don't worry about it." But I'd say like guys like that, and I mean, just his words right that night were encouragement. But Kerry Duke, Ben Bastrop, Ron Ritchie, all of them were. If you were in with them, they were all willing to help you out. I mean, like I said, I wanted the advice. I didn't want to be the mouthy kid or the kid that was going to be, "I'm going to be a big star, be a North American champ in no time," because that's not what it's about. Not when you get in to start with.
Now, back in 88, 89, when Davey Boy and Dynamite came back to Stampede Wrestling, it was a great time for the fans, but it also proved to be kind of tumultuous for the Stampede Wrestling itself. What are your recollections about that time in particular?
Like, it was still running fairly decent, I'd say, and you know, it's just basically they came back, they brought them back, they came back, and it was basically trying to keep that promotion to survive. It was just in survival mode at that time, and they're just trying to get it to survive. Dynamite and Davey could turn it around. It would have been great, but there was just myself. I don't think there was no way to turn it around. It was going down. It was going downhill, unfortunately, and you're losing all those big stars. What the people had, you can go back to the late 70s, early 80s, mid 80s. What the people had back then, that's what the people wanted. But times are changing, right? Everything changes. And that just happened to be one of them that changed. And you go back even today, and you'll never have the Stampede wrestling we had back then that the people craved.
Back in the early 90s, you were doing some enhancement work with WWF. Do you have any good memories of what was going on at that time?
Well, that was all good times. Going in and doing TV for them, Bulldog Bob Brown was the one who called and got that all started somewhat. And all we had to do was basically when he told us when and where, and we just showed up. And working with some of that talent, it was just the most incredible talent I've ever worked with. They were so easy to work with, so light. It was incredible.
And after that, I think you worked with the Rocky Mountain Wrestling promotion in Calgary. That was your first heavyweight championship, I believe. A lot of people aren't aware of that because a lot of that didn't make it out onto the airwaves very much, but they had some good wrestlers like Jerry Morrow, Steve Rivers. Can you tell us about some of those stories and winning that first title?
Steve Rivers came in along that time, and him and I hit it off. He trained with Davey Boy to train with myself, and him and I hit it off, and we kind of became the tag team, the U.S. Express, and tried to carry that and run with that. And Jerry was always good because he had advice for everybody. And let's not forget some of the names that were there, like Chris Jericho was there, Lance Storm was there. And we know where those two guys went throughout the world and what they have done and what Chris is doing today. And yeah, we had some good times. There wasn't a lot of big guys there. Maybe a handful. And yeah, I guess Ed Langley, the promoter, just felt it was a need. Let's put the title on me for a little bit, and they put the belt on me, and kind of ran for it for a little bit, and it was cool, you know, to be kind of sort of recognized. But again, like you said, it never got out much, never went anywhere, never got TV, and good training ground for some of the younger guys, and a good place for us to continue to be in our backyard and still kind of wrestle, right? Mm-hmm.
Now, you had been considered a bit of a veteran when Jericho and Storm broke in. What were they like when they were initially in their first few years of training?
They're good guys. Lance, Jericho, they're very quiet. They took advice from anybody and everybody and ran with what they had to run with. And I would say, not knowing but knowing now, they kept to themselves. They kept everything in the back. They kept everything very quiet and pursued. And look where they went today by just being quiet and listening and working and getting as much work as they could and pursuing things without telling other people, because that's the one thing you want to do. You tell people and they backstab you and they're gone and they're at their other promotion before you are, or, you know, and I would say they did very well at doing it.
Did you ever have offers to go to Japan? Was it ever a consideration for you at any point?
I did, yes. Fortunately, I was doing spot shows for Ross and Bruce. We're Rocky Mountain, Rocky Mountain, was it not Rocky Mountain? Rocky View, the Rocky View Rodeo, our big famous year weekend out there, Saturday and Sunday afternoon. We'd go out there, and then they did the Strathmore Pro Rodeo as well, and they ran a show out there, and called me up, wanted me to come work, so I went out to do the show, and one of the young Japanese fellas that Bad News and Jerry had in here training, Ross said to me when I got to the dress room that I'd be working with him, being the most experienced vet and what have you, and they put me over against him, what have you, and he asked for a photo after. Him and his manager asked for photos after, and we took some photos, and that was the end of that. Went off to Vancouver to work ICW again, and Jerry got out there. Jerry was out there with us, and Jerry said, hey, I got to talk to you. They want you to go to Japan with us, what have you, because of the young fella I worked for. I worked with him in Strathmore, Alberta. So I'm like all stories. They're like, okay, sounds good to me. Let me know, because sometimes they never work out, and it's just all promises. But got home from Vancouver, and my phone was ringing. Jerry was calling probably once a week. We got to do this, we got to do that. They want this, they want that. And next thing I know, we're on our way to Japan for 18 days.
Absolutely. Which promotions were you working with in Japan?
It was, I can't remember the name of the promotion. CJ, you might remember the name of it. The promoter, Take Ishikawa, was the promoter, and we were over there for 18 days. We wrestled every other night. A few of the major cities, towns that they went to. Tarzan Goda was over there with us, wrestled him in the main event one night. Went over there as a tag team with Bad News Allen. This is the reason we went over there. As the NWA heavyweight champion last night. In order to keep the promoter happy, we were to drop the titles to the promoter and one of his boys. So yeah, like I said, CJ would probably remember the name of the promotion. I don't quite remember. It didn't last very long.
General CJ, do you remember much about Kenny's time in Japan?
Yeah, I was on line one day, and I just happened to see some of Kenny's old matches and stuff, and Kenny did mention that he was in Japan in time with Bad News and I believe Jerry Morrow. But I was on line one day, and I just happened to see some of Kenny's matches, and he'd been there with Edge, our present-day Edge from WWE.
Right, Adam Copeland, yeah.
Yeah, he had tagged up with Adam in Japan there. And it's probably a pretty good experience for Kenny having Edge as a tag team partner there. I remember stories back when Tim Flowers gave us a story when I trained with Tim about Edge and Christian. That Tim claims that Edge and Christian were scared of Tim. And yeah, Tim was a pretty intimidating guy, but he was still a good trainer, and he was very business. He knew a lot about the business. But yeah, I was sure glad to see when Kenny going to Japan, get a lot of Japan experience.
Sounds good. Kenny, I think you were over in Japan around the same time that Rick Patterson was using his Leatherface promo. Do you remember much about that?
No, I don't. I remember he was over there doing it, but we never did cross paths, never did run into him whatsoever.
Gotcha. You brought up some ICW. Now, I heard a good story in ICW that you were riding in a taxi cab, and you had the taxi cab driver convinced you were Hulk Hogan. Can you tell us about that?
Now, there's a book out, and the story is in the book, thanks to a friend of ours, Jason Helton, who wrestled with us at the time, and we all know who his dad was, played for the Stampeders, John Helton. Jason was a great kid. His nickname, we called him Happy because he was always happy and laughing and smiling. But the story, now, they said it was in Revelstoke, BC. My recollection, It was in Abbotsford, BC, where we wrestled, or Cloverdale, Cloverdale, BC, where we wrestled for Tim Flowers. And we were tired of going to the bars in Cloverdale, the same stuff. So we went over to Langley one night, took a cab, had a few beers, realized we got to go back, and it's about a $30 cab ride. Well, we had a few beers and what have you. We were feeling pretty good. Jason Helton was there, myself. Tommy Lane was there, was a young up-and-coming wrestling star. We got back. We were getting into Cloverdale, and we're looking at the cab fare. We're like, God damn, man. Like, what are we going to do? Like, there goes our whole payoff in paying a cab fare. So I kind of was in the backseat with him. We were talking to the cab driver. He believed we were all these pro wrestlers, and I was Hulk Hogan and what have you. And he was just like, yeah, all he could say, and he was kind of happy. Like, we hit that red light, and Tommy Lane and I, out the back door, we went and took off. And we left for Jason Helton in there, and he looked at him, and he just said to the cab driver, I'll get him. And he jumped in the cab and ran too. And we ran all through that town of Cloverdale trying to get back to our hotel like a bunch of dummies.
Did you get away with it?
Yeah, we did. We did.
All right, another big time in Stampede is when Stampede had its reboot in 1999. Bruce Hart kind of took over the reins. You wrestled a few matches, I think, at Victoria Pavilion there, did you not?
Yes, we did. I think that was for WOW, World of Wrestling, is what Bruce called it.
How was it? How was it going at that time? There were a lot of very young names in there. Teddy Hart, T.J. Wilson.
It was good. It was more of a training ground. Bruce's trainees. Ted, man, we could talk stories about Ted forever. But I gotta give Ted props and credit where credit is due. He was always there for me. Always helped me. What have you? Always trained with me when I wanted to train. When I wanted to try new stuff. T.J. Wilson, another kid, always helped me out. Great kid, and what have you. But it was a lot of younger guys, younger talent. Bruce was trying to train and trying to get stuff going and bring people in to try and get TV and what have you. And I'll go back to like the '80s where all those names, those veteran guys, worked their asses off night after night after night and sold out every frickin' town and city that we had went to. And the younger guys. And I don't know if it was Bruce and Ross promising these guys the world or what, and they just believed in the hype. And it was like the hype, they thought the hype was going to be there. We could see it wasn't going to be there, but, we're in our backyard. We're working around our hometowns, getting a payoff. It was basically the reason, and if I could help these guys out, I'd help them out. But when it come down to really trying to give them advice and everything, they all had their own agenda, and it was kind of tough. And your heart and soul just wasn't into it. And, you did what you had to do. And Ross and Bruce always put these young guys over on me. And it's just like after a while, it's just like, I've had enough, I've had enough.
Did you foresee the kind of decline of the promotion? Because it only lasted about a year or two, correct?
Yeah. Yes, I did. You could see the decline, and you could see the promises these young kids were getting and what have you. And it's just like, you can't tell them different. You don't want to break their hearts. You don't want to scare them away. They're paying big money to train with Bruce and Ross and what have you. So you try to help them the best you can. And it's like they just did not want to work their asses off like the vets back in the day. The Leo Burks, the David Schultz, the Kerry Brown, the Duke Myers, Ben Bastrabs, Phil LaFleur. The guys worked their asses off in the gym, on the road, hotels every night. They just pushed and worked. They got in the ring, they worked their asses off in the ring to make that crowd believe. These younger guys just like want to do all these big high spots, high moves, fancy moves. It's like there's no need for it, you guys. But again, trying to get them to listen and focus and pay attention, and they just want to do their own agenda. And it's sad to say, I'm sorry to say that, but that's just the way I feel.
And it was a sad state of affairs because they had a good contract with the A Channel. They actually had a lot of penetration to the TV market around Western Canada, and still it just didn't take off the way it should have, I think.
No, it didn't, and you're right. It's sad to say. Who knows if it could have took off? If it could have been as good or better than Stampede Wrestling, I don't really know. But by that time, I think the fans, the people, the crowds, they were just all tired of it, right? They're just all tired of it, and what they wanted, they couldn't have, and they could see it too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And over the recent years, you've been working with RCW. That's in Calgary. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, Steve Stiles called me up quite a while ago, a few years ago, and asked me if I wanted to work, come back, and what have you. And I thought, why not, right? And he was straight honest with me. He wanted me to help the younger guys and kind of help them out in a way to teach them how to tell stories, teach them how to work properly, and stuff like that. And at the time, I wrestled Stampede. I broke in there, and I went out Japan. I did talent enhancement for WWE and everything, and I'd been away for a while, and my daughter was born, and she was at the age where she knew and would remember and what have you, and I wanted her to see me be able to wrestle. So I was able to, like Steve said, two things at once. You can help my younger guys, and your daughter gets a chance to see you wrestle. And still today, helping them out. She's somewhat older now, and she still loves coming down to the promotions and watching her dad get beat up or beat somebody up.
It must be a great feeling being able to have your daughter watch that. What did she say about it afterwards?
She thinks some of it's kind of crazy and some of it's kind of bad, but she thinks as well. She thinks some of it's kind of good too. She kind of enjoys it. She got into Nasty Nate there for RCW. Him and his valet there. I would ask her to do some videotaping, and she got into a little bit of doing that, and I think she kind of liked a bit of it. I'm not sure if she wants to pursue it, but I just told her to be careful and to watch, and I can help her out through a few things, and I can help him out as well, and they're very grateful for that as well.
Right. Are you keeping her in kayfabe?
No. It's pretty much, kayfabe's pretty much gone, I would say. It's sad to say, it'd be nice, but it's like, no, I've told her basically everything. And I think that's where she gets her laugh on him and all.
General CJ, can you tell us about your most fun time you had at Victoria Pavilion? What match stands out for you, or what event stands out for you?
Victoria Pavilion, yeah, a lot of memories for sure. I believe there was a tag team tournament one night for the vacant international tag team belts. One of the favorite teams, the two favorite teams that were on that night were the British Bulldogs and the Hart Foundation. That was a pretty good night. There's so many good memories of the pavilion, actually. I really enjoyed going to the pavilion. I enjoyed it the most when I went with Kenny, because Kenny was always ribbing other fans, and he always knew a lot of people around the pavilion, and we'd like to just rib people and other fans, But yeah, I remember some matches that I wasn't at that were pretty memorable when I was a lot younger, and probably one of the greatest Stampede matches, in my opinion, was the Bruce Hart against Dynamite Kid. And when Bruce got screwed out by that referee Sandy Scott, and it ended up Bruce ended up taking a round out of him there in the ring, and then referee Wayne Hart had to get in there and get involved, and that's probably one of the best Stampede wrestling matches I've ever seen on TV, but I wasn't at it live.
That must have been back in about 1982?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it was around there. It's on the internet. You can see it on YouTube. And the other good one was the Davey Boy and Dynamite when they were feuding each other. That I believe Davey Boy won that night. He won the internet. That was the Commonwealth mid heavyweight title that they were going for in the forefront.
Now, as a fan who was in Saskatchewan at that time, I'd watch those matches always thinking it must be bizarre to be a fan in the stands knowing that Bruce Hart's brother is refereeing his match. Did that ever sit poorly with any of the fans in the audience who were still into kayfabe at that time?
Well, I don't think the fans were really were really concerned about that. It was so much kayfabe back then, eh? And it was so, it was presented as so real to the fans. I don't think the fans really had time to think of that kind of thing, that they were both brothers and there was maybe favoritism or what have you, right? It's just the way the boys performed in the ring back then that made it look so real.
That's great. Kenny, do you have anything you'd like to plug for us right now? I mean, obviously you're still at the RCW events. Anything else you'd like to talk about that you're involved with?
No, I'm just off and on at RCW and what have you, and trying to help the guys out. And, you know, anybody wants some help out or any help or any advice, hey, feel free to get in contact with me. I'm not afraid to share and help these younger guys out, give them advice, anything I can do. And if not, everything's all good, my friend. Everything's all good. Come on down on a Friday night to Calgary and see the boys and see all the young talent and see some of the old fellas too at RCW.
Absolutely. So the RCW is on Friday nights. It's at the Royal Canadian Legion right downtown Calgary, correct?
That's correct. And be careful. I'm not sure what's going to happen in the next few days with this coronavirus and lockdown. Hate to say it, but I don't know. I don't know if it's looking good come this next few weekends or not, to be honest with you. But if when things are up and running, yeah, come on down. Calgary, RCW at the Legion downtown Calgary, Alberta.
Yeah, it's amazing how much the coronavirus has really hurt independent wrestling. Here in British Columbia, we've only got one promotion called 365 Wrestling that's been running at all. Everything else is shut down.
That's sad. It's sad because I know working out there in ICW, and I've even a couple times working for Michelle Starr, ECCW. They had some good crowds, some good workers, and everything.
So that's great. I want to thank Kenny and General CJ for coming on today and spending your valuable time with us. Thank you both so very much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for having us on.
If you want to do, feel free to get in contact with me or contact CJ. Him and I are really tight, so either way it'll go through. But yeah, thank you very much for taking your time on a Sunday to do all this.
Well, there you have it, wrestling fans. A great interview with Kenny Johnson and his good friend General CJ. Stampede Wrestling is known for producing many young stars over the years that have spread the Stampede Wrestling theme all across the world of wrestling. And Kenny is a good example of that, applying his trade across the U.S. and Canada and even into Japan for one foray. With that, we're going to take a little bit of a segue and talk a little bit about the Dungeon and some of the actual people that Stampede Wrestling produced over the years, from Stu Hart's Basement.
Banging over, a very good comparison. It must be a good feeling for you to get back into Stampede Wrestling.
Yeah, I'm very glad to be back, and by the turnout you can see we got some very loyal fans here, and they've made wrestling in the West one of the big sports.
I might just mention that, of course, you have a great relationship with Titan out of New York, and that means that the likes of, well, next month, for example, the Dynamite Kid, Davey Boy Smith will be here, and in future, undoubtedly, Hulk Hogan and some others.
I even hope I'll see my son Brett back here, and the Jim the Animal Neidhart will be back here too, possibly. And this Hulk Hogan, I think he will be available here as soon as we can prove we can have a fellow that'll give him a match.
Well, I think you got a few hanging around, Stu. Great to see you. Stu Hart, the wrestling promoter for Stampede Wrestling.
With that, let's listen to an audio clip from a WWE segment where TJ Wilson, Natty Neidhart, and Bret Hart were interviewed about their experiences in the Dungeon.
Please welcome the one and only Stu Hart!
If I had to explain to somebody who didn't know who Stu Hart was, I would say that he was one of the kindest yet tough humans I've ever come across in my life.
My grandfather was very, very hard on everybody that he trained. My dad has never been more scared of anybody in his life.
He was a tireless workaholic, and at the same time taught wrestlers. He took care of his wrestlers. He put on great wrestling shows. I think we all had such great respect for everything my dad stood for.
My grandfather instilled in us that respect, integrity, and work ethic were instrumental to success.
Stu Hart's dungeon was in the basement of his mansion. It had this green mat attached to 3 sides of the wall.
The dungeon's just one little room, and the ceilings are very low. There's only one little window that you could really look out, and it was just dark, damp, cold, and it had this mystery about it.
It was pretty intense. It wasn't fun and games down there. A lot of guys that screamed pretty hard down there. It's a pain-filled room, and a lot of pride went into all the hard lessons that were learned down there.
The WWE schedule is nothing to be scoffed at or laughed at. It's very tough, but it definitely all comes back down to that time I had in the dungeon and that training there that both physically and mentally prepared me for the long road ahead.
Training in the dungeon was one of the most valuable experiences of my life. It taught me about who I am, it taught me how to persevere, and it taught me how to show my guts in a way that I never knew before. That if I wanted something, I could have it. I just had to work hard for it.
We got tough down there. I mean, we really did, and you got a respect. You know, they joke about my dad, who took great pride in sort of torturing guys down there. But you know, that's not altogether true at all. My dad, he loved teaching wrestling. He just wanted to make you the toughest guy that you could be, and he did. He taught a lot of guys that came through there to be tougher men.
One of the most mystical things about Stampede Wrestling was the dungeon. The dungeon was often commented on WWF telecasts through the 80s and 90s, giving it almost a religious significance. In fact, though, the dungeon was actually a basement in Stu Hart's home, which he purchased in 1951. It had a very low ceiling, an area for laundry, a big smell of bad odor through the room, and some old mats on the floor. However, that dungeon had a lot of famous wrestlers travel through it and a lot of famous noises emanating from it. Besides all of the Hart sons who would have gone through Stampede Wrestling and on to other international wrestling opportunities, many famous wrestlers have performed at least part of their training in the dungeon. This includes famous Stampede Wrestling stars from the 1970s such as Archie Goldie, the Dynamite Kid, Davey Boy Smith, but also several of the stars from the 1980s started off in Stampede Wrestling, such as Brian Pillman, Jushin Thunder Liger, and Steve Blackman. The later years of the Hart brothers' training didn't always occur in the dungeon, so some of the later stars that came out from Hart brothers wrestling camps, including stars like Chris Jericho, Lance Storm, Tyson Kidd, for example, would not have had the same exposure to the dungeon per se. Now today we're going to be doing an interview with one of the stars of Stampede Wrestling through the late 1980s, Kenny Johnson. Kenny Johnson went through training with Beef Wellington and Jeff Wheeler and a few sessions after Chris Benoit would have gone through the dungeon doing his training. In fact, some training actually went on under Smith Hart, who is Stu's oldest son, right up until around the time of 2015 or even 16, until Smith Hart passed in 2017. So the dungeon itself has a long history, going from the 1950s into just the recent years. As such, it has led to a huge number of wrestling stars that have traveled the world, spreading the style of Stampede Wrestling.
If you are looking for the best books, DVDs, and posters on classic wrestling nostalgia, then you want to visit crowbarpress.com. There are literally dozens of titles there, including biographies of the likes of Bruiser Brody, Ole Anderson, Ivan Koloff, and of course, Dick the Bruiser, as we've spoke about here on the Dave Dynasty Show. You want to visit crowbarpress.com for all of your classic wrestling nostalgia needs. Again, that is crowbarpress.com. All right, and there you have it, the conclusion of episode 2 of the Ring-a-Ding-Dong Dandy Stampede Wrestling Podcast. Once again, thank you for joining us. As I mentioned earlier, make sure you follow us on Twitter at StampedePod. Also, check out our Facebook group, Buy a Stampede, a Ring-a-Ding-Dong Dandy shirt on our Pro Wrestling Tees store. Give you all those links earlier. If you want to help the show financially, keep us running, everything's invested back in the show that we bring you every week for free. You can do that at paypal.me/TheDaveDynasty, and anything will help. So just go on there, make a little contribution here in the holiday season. Don't forget your favorite independent wrestling podcast when you are planning such things. We do appreciate it. So thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed it. We will be back soon with another episode of the Dave Dynasty Show in about a month with another episode of Ring a Ding Dong Dandy. But until then, in the meantime and in between time, wherever you go and whatever you do, be good, be safe, and keep on growing.